What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we received an over-the-air change to Hulkbuster. A few other cards as well, but Hulkbuster is the one that we're going to be talking about in this video because I've been playing Hulkbuster all season. I've been playing this list here, Deadpool Destroy with Hulkbuster, and I've already talked about why I'm playing this exact list in a few of my recent videos, but I think the fact that they are nerfing Hulkbuster specifically speaks to the fact that this was probably the ideal build of this deck. I used it to get into the top 400 players and top 100 in America, all as a free-to-play player, by the way, and I also earned a couple infinite tickets as well, infinity tickets for Conquest. So this list has done very, very well for me, but now Hulkbuster is getting adjusted down to a 2-3, so we've got to figure out where Destroy goes from here. So in this video, I'm going to look at 6+ different options for Destroy decks going forward. And then I'm also going to take a look at the top 4 of this week's Community Gaming Latin America tournament because it seemed to make sense with the content of the rest of the video, just looking at deck lists. But the first Destroy deck that I want to highlight in this video is going to be this one. It's the exact same deck. And that's because I don't know if this Hulkbuster nerf is actually going to impact this deck that much. So we do have to just at least acknowledge that the fact that Hulkbuster is getting adjusted down to a 2-3 will reduce the capacity to high roll and do some crazy powerful things with Hulkbuster and Deadpool, but it will increase your ability to curve out in a pretty straightforward way, which I think has its own merits, especially if you are planning on using this as a deck for laddering, which just means you're going to be playing hundreds of games and you want to, or assuming you're going for the leaderboard, if you're just going for infinite, might not take you hundreds of games, but the point being that Hulkbuster now as a 2-3 is potentially a more consistent card. And this is one of the things that I brought up when I made my first video this season on the deck. I brought up that Hulkbuster is really a flex slot in the deck. You typically see in this slot, oops, I meant to take it out of the deck. We'll just keep it in here for now, but you will either see this spot replaced with Taskmaster or most commonly Arnim Zola. And you'll see the other 11 cards in the deck remain the same. And I think that what I said at the time was that Taskmaster and Arnim Zola both require some other specific amounts of high roll. I felt like Taskmaster only really worked if you were already doing Hulkbuster things as well. So then on the final turn, you get to go Deadpool plus Taskmaster for a bunch of power. But Arnim Zola kind of requires that, like, either you do the same thing. Sometimes you can get a big Venom with it though, which I think is also cool. And you can also potentially use it on Knull if you're able to get Knull out on turn 6 with an X23. So they all require different amounts of high rolliness. And I picked Hulkbuster specifically out of that trio because it felt like the most consistent card of those 3. And now I think that Hulkbuster is even less high rolly, but potentially even more consistent. So if I had the choice to pick between a 2-3 Hulkbuster and a 3-5 Hulkbuster, maybe one was called like Mega Hulkbuster or something, and the other one's called like Hulkbuster Mach 1 or Mark 1, whatever they call it, I might have chosen the smaller, more compact Hulkbuster just for its ability to climb on the ladder. So I think that's where we have to start with this video, to say that kind of cheating, counting this as one of the possible new decks that you can play, but it does make it a much different deck. I mean, we're only changing one card here. Most of these lists are going to be the same. We're just going to cut out like a few cards here and there. I would say if you want to look at the core of Destroy, you don't need Hulkbuster. That's a flex slot, as I already said. We've seen a lot of people recently cut Deathlock for Grandmaster. Deathlock, the weakest of your destroy cards, and Grandmaster allowing you to double up on those effects and also do some cute things with Nico. Unfortunately, I wasn't recording. I record almost all of my games, but I had a cool play where I used Nico's draw 2 cards ability twice in a game with Subterranea and was just able to overwhelm my opponent because typically drawing 4 cards in a game means you've overdrawn your deck, but in this case I was actually able to get out of the Subterranea lock, so that was pretty cool. So I would say this is the core of the deck. However, I also think that Death is cuttable, specifically because there is potentially a lot of Mobius running around, and if you are playing up against a lot of Mobius yourself, you might not want to play Death. It just gets stuck in your hand. There's some other cards we're going to look at later on in the video that help alleviate that problem, but I would say that this is more or less the core of the deck. So how do you then flesh it out from here is kind of what we're going to look at, but we'll also see some other decks that go off the beaten path. I think this deck makes the most sense to take a look at next. So this is Davide's Dracula Destroy list that they recently used to get second place in Lamby's tournament. I believe this was this past weekend, and I've tried this deck out since then. It's really cool. So if you aren't familiar with this interaction, it's kind of not supposed to be an interaction that exists in Marvel Snap, but basically Dracula gets to take Knull's power if you are able to discard Knull with Dracula, which is really busted. It means that you are playing an additional card to make your Knull work, but it makes your Knull cost 2 energy cheaper, which just means you don't have to rely on X23 to have those huge high rolly moments. And this can also allow you to do some other fun stuff. I'm gonna have a video out on this list specifically tomorrow. I do think I ran it through a gold conquest and won with it, and actually kind of played up against other destroy decks every round, so I thought this was going to be interesting content from that perspective, taking a look at a bunch of different destroy lists. Haven't recorded that yet, but I think that this deck is really good, and then it does also make the cut for Grandmaster instead of Deathlock, and is otherwise a pretty stock list. It's kind of interesting because nobody was playing Dracula, so this is just Dracula in that flex spot. Dracula instead of Taskmaster, Arnim Zola, Hulkbuster, or a tech card. I'm not sure if I mentioned that yet, but this slot can also be a tech card, and that's actually the next list that I wanted to look at. But yeah, really, really cool innovation here from Davide. The Dracula is really cool. The other thing that Dracula does, I brought up Mobius. I'm not sure if it's in tomorrow's video, but I know at some point, because I've also been playing this deck on ladder, I used Dracula to discard a death that was stuck in my hand thanks to my opponent's Mobius. And I guess just as a little teaser for tomorrow's video, the very first game I used Dracula to bring out a Deadpool that was destroyed on the final turn, and that just gives you another opportunity to destroy your Deadpools as well, which is another cool way to high roll with the deck. I haven't come up to any scenarios where Dracula discards Wolverine or X23, and that's been relevant for me, but it is potentially something fun to consider that those do have some discard synergy, but that's not really the point of it. It really just exists as a way to cheaply get out Deadpool or Knull on those turns where you are constricted on energy in the late game, Dracula just being a little bit cheaper. So the fact that this list just did well in a tournament, maybe the devs don't have all of the data on this list by the time they locked in all of their changes for the OTA. Obviously, if they are updating, so I will edit this part of the video out. hopefully, if the devs tell me I'm not allowed to say this, I think they're going to tell me that I am allowed to say this. They told me in a private creator chat that they found the Hulkbuster version of the deck was performing the best through their data. I mean, they were just looking at my games, right? They were looking, wow, NoLucksGiven does so good with the Hulkbuster version. We gotta nerf it. So I only bring that up to say, maybe they haven't seen the Dracula version of the deck. Seems pretty sweet to me, and I definitely enjoy this, and it already wasn't playing Hulkbuster, so I think that this is the first place to start now with Davide's second place list. But one other deck that I wanted to take a look at is very, very similar. I believe this is the list that was posted by Den from Marvel Snap Zone on Twitter. I'm pretty sure, so basically just cutting the Dracula for Shang-Chi. And you could always cut, if you cut this Grandmaster for Deathlock, this is a list that's existed, right? It's been around. But with the combination of cutting Deathlock for Grandmaster and using Shang-Chi as your flex spot, as your 12th card in the deck, you also give yourself the opportunity to then go turn 6 Grandmaster plus Shang-Chi, which I think is really, really powerful and just one of the most busted interactions in the game. The fact that it also pumps up your Knull is gravy on top of that, and ultimately just means I think this is going to be a really powerful avenue to take the deck. There are other cards, and I guess, so I'm going to come back to this list in a moment, but this is the list that just won the Community Gaming Latin America tournament this week instead of Shang-Chi playing Alioth. I'm going to get into this a little bit more in a moment, but wanted to bring it up now while we are talking about the fact that this spot in the deck is flexible. I think, so Alioth does something different here, right? Alioth and Shang-Chi, they're two sides of the same coin, having priority, not having priority. I feel like Alioth is a little bit expensive on the curve, potentially, but I've also never tried it in Destroy, and I think that there's some definite times where it can do some cool stuff for you. It is just a little bit tricky because it combos with Knull, but you can't play both of them on the final turn, and that's a similar problem that the Shang-Chi build of the deck has as well. But I do think that both of those angles can work. One other thing that while we're talking tech here, Enchantress, I think is a totally fine card to slot into this as well, just because most of the things that are Shang-Chi-able, this deck can put up comparable numbers to actually battle with them, but where this deck could struggle, doesn't always, but could struggle, is against some crazy Onslaught, Iron Man shenanigans, and in those situations, you just might want to have access to Enchantress, but it isn't as versatile of a card. So if your plan is to play 100 games with the deck, Shang-Chi is probably going to be useful more of the time. Alioth is going to be useful more of the time. But if your plan is to shore up your bad matchups, then you could play Enchantress, or you could just say, well, I'm not going to care about said bad matchups. And I think either of those ways are fine ways to approach it. Two other lists for Destroy that I wanted to look at. This one right here, Ravonna, is my creation. So this is to say, what if we cut the death because there's so much Mobius, and I want to play Grandmaster Shang-Chi, and the weakest card in the deck from there is actually Wolverine. Wolverine is cool sometimes, and it does do some interesting things. It helps make your cards a little bit bigger, and I do want to say that this list is totally untested, but if we're playing Knull and Arnim Zola and Grandmaster, I feel like maybe Ravonna could make its way into the list, and it's just another way, like Dracula, to get Knull out there on earlier than turn 6. Now we can play Knull on turn 5, turn 6 Arnim Zola the Knull, and then Grandmaster to Arnim Zola the Knull again. That's like the magical Christmas land, the perfect curve with the deck. And definitely could make this worth exploring. Like I said, this is totally untested. This is just something that I've kind of been honestly not really even thinking about it. I just kind of put it together a little bit before this video, and you also get to run the Shang-Chi plus Grandmaster combo. One thing that you can do is like Ravonna to just get Knull out there a little bit earlier, and then on the final turn, Shang-Chi. Or you can play a turn 5 Knull, turn 4 Shang-Chi on something, and then turn 6 Arnim Zola the Shang-Chi again, potentially throwing in Grandmaster to do some other shenanigans, and like you can Shang-Chi every location on the final turn of the game because you just do some wild stuff. So there's a lot of cool potential plays with this deck that might make it well suited for the mirror and other high rolly sorts of destroy decks. And the next deck that we're going to take a look at is also sort of a really high rolly one. This is Nimrod Destroy from the store manager, which may be a familiar name to you if you have watched one of my previous destroy videos, the Altar of Death featured location video, where this player was playing a Galactus build of this deck to go even bigger in Altar of Death, but this is still a really big version of Destroy for the mirror, playing Destroyer, Shuri, and Nimrod, as well as Iron Lad for a little bit more consistency, and then Magic as an additional source of ramp and consistency as well. So this is a pretty consistent deck. The store manager is also a top 400 player and has just been playing this deck for most of the season with some small changes based off featured locations. But this is a pretty sweet deck and also doesn't run Hulkbuster if you are looking to try to get like the next level. Now, this list is not for everyone. It's a little bit more high rolly in nature, but if you are used to, or if you enjoy playing high rolly decks in Marvel Snap, they're going to have different snap patterns, of course, but when you are able to get the wins, of course, you're going to be able to win more cubes than other people would. And I actually have a game that I played up against the store manager that I wanted to take a look at now. We can see that the store manager was also in the top 500 of the ladder as of this recording. They reached out to me after this game. I wasn't paying enough attention to the name of my opponent here, and they reached out just to say like, okay, you got me pretty good. We're gonna win this one. We're playing the Dracula build of this deck. We also grab a Kyera from Camp Lehigh, but there you can see the Dracula and then Grandmaster as well. I'm still a big fan of Grandmaster. I know that there's been some people with some reservations on the card. I think that like you look at Beta Ray Bill, for instance, which is the newest card, there's just a lot of synergies with Grandmaster and Beta Ray Bill, and there's going to be synergies with Grandmaster and whatever other cards come out in the future. So yeah, I thought this was a cool opportunity to play Grandmaster, but it's not needed. Most of the lists that you see Grandmaster in, other than the Ravonna one and I guess like any of the ones with Shang-Chi, you're definitely losing something with Shang-Chi not playing Grandmaster, but otherwise you can just play Deathlock is the point that I wanted to make there. With Limbo, I think we're well set up. Again, I don't know what my opponent is playing at this point, so I don't realize that they are playing Destroy just yet, but I'm happy enough to snap on the idea that I will be able to play Knull and Deadpool on the final turn. And then they play Shuri, and then I think this is where I realize what might actually be up here. Ultimately, I am going to decide to play my Deadpool into Limbo this turn, really just to be energy efficient in case I want to spend all of my energy on the turns coming up here. And then I wind up drawing Nico on the 6th turn of the game, and Nico is on the replace a location ability, which gives me a really golden opportunity to change Limbo out from under my opponent and potentially take over the game in a way that they weren't expecting. And this is kind of like I'm kind of putting a bunch of points into Limbo here, which is good if my opponent plays Destroyer into Limbo specifically, or if they play Destroyer into Dark Dimension. I was realizing that that was probably what my opponent was going to be playing at this point, and probably wasn't playing like a Galactus build, or that I wasn't really like afraid of Galactus with the Dark Dimension. But it's just going to be Destroyer. They are actually going to play it into Camp Lehigh, but Dracula is able to find the 1 and 3 and discard the opponent's null. So there you go, just a little bit of a silly one. Store manager reached out to me afterwards and just said like, the fact that they called it the Nico rug pull. They said the fact that you Nico rug pulled me there on the final turn, I was losing sleep over it. But regardless, that aside, this is a pretty solid deck. I think that that still showed that the deck can do some powerful things. I just got a little bit lucky drawing Nico on turn 6. You have to like randomly just have Nico turn into the location change ability on turn 6. So of course there is a lot of RNG in that, and then some RNG in Dracula as well to just barely grab the win. But if you are looking for another fun angle to play with Destroy, I think that this is really cool. There was also a list a while ago that made some other changes to this deck. So it also made it a Taskmaster deck. And the way that they did that, there's a few ways to get it done, but the way that they did it that I thought was really cool, and this was played like months ago, is you would use Invisible Woman, and I'm sure I've got videos of this build on my channel, but basically you play Shuri, well, you play Invisible Woman, then you play Shuri, then you play Taskmaster behind Invisible Woman, and then on turn 6 you play Destroyer into Shuri. That doubles up to 32, destroys the Invisible Woman. Taskmaster then flips over and sees that the last card that you played was a 32 power Destroyer, so then Taskmaster gets to copy that. So that is kind of another cool combo if you can manage to fit it into this deck. And Invisible Woman also has some interesting interactions with Venom, Deathlock, and Carnage as Destroy cards, as well as potentially Grandmaster, working that one in there as well. So that could be a different angle to take the deck in if you're looking for even more combos. But if you're looking for a solid Destroy deck that was able to get into the top 400 this season, then check out Nimrod Destroy from the store manager. I was just looking at some DMs with the store manager, and they said they used this list to climb from rank 650 all the way up to 303, so almost cracked into the top 300 even. And yeah, they really like it. They said it's definitely a lot more high rolly, requires a good draw, like I said, and there's some cool stuff that you can do if you're able to go like early X23 into the Shuri Nimrod Destroyer combo with magic as well. That gives you 8 energy on turn 7, which is enough to Grandmaster the Destroyer while also dropping a null, which, like, talk about going over the top. That's just crazy. And while that does require a bunch of specific cards, it is worth pointing out, if you give yourself an extra turn with magic and draw 2 cards with Nico, you will see every single card in your deck, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, definitely just a really cool thing that makes the deck a little bit more consistent than it might otherwise seem. I think that Nico is like a very... I don't want to say underrated card. I think a lot of people recognize the power of playing Nico. It's just to say, if you have not played with Nico in any of these lists, it's secretly what is making a lot of these decks work, because these decks were not nearly as consistent until Nico came around, and now you can do some busted stuff in Marvel Snap. The last deck that I wanted to showcase as we get into the community gaming event as well is Flying Gnome's deck, which is also a Destroy deck, and I did also showcase a little bit earlier with Alioth as the tech card and then Grandmaster instead of Deathlock. I think that this is a pretty solid list as far as all of the, I mean, it's Deadpool Destroy. There's not much more you can say about it. Grandmaster instead of Deathlock is, I would say, a pretty neutral side grade, and Flying Gnome agreed. Flying Gnome said they were still kind of feeling out Grandmaster, and they're not sure if, specifically in this build without Shang-Chi, if the card is worth it. There is sometimes that you can do some cool stuff with Alioth, and the other thing that Flying Gnome pointed out to me is that they felt like Alioth was good in the, it's good where the deck is bad. It's good at like destroying Onslaught or I'm blanking on the name of it right now, Living Tribunal. It's good at in the where I said Enchantress could be good, and maybe I'm underselling Alioth there. Maybe it is just better than playing Enchantress, just a little bit more versatile and still good in the areas it's good. This deck isn't a deck that has a problem getting priority if you really want it. It's also a deck that can very easily toss priority, so you're often in control of that. But the fact that most people don't expect Alioth in Destroy means that they often won't be battling to gain priority because they just aren't realizing that that's important. And it's you can either like take them for a whole bunch of cubes in an Alioth game where they think they're going to Shang-Chi you or something, which can oftentimes be an awkward spot that the deck has that I've talked about in the past. But Alioth kind of like covers that. So I think that this is really great. Let me just open up Discord again and see if there were any other notes that they had. They said that they're in the finals. We're going to see who they played against in the finals in just a moment. The last game was a Subterranea game, and I brought this up, I believe, earlier on in this video, and they were able to use Grandmaster plus Nico to draw 4 cards and get themselves out of that sticky situation. So that was really good. That's the main thing that I have to say. I will also link Gnome's link Gnome. I will link their Twitter and Twitch below. I'll link that for all of the competitors for the community gaming tournament. I don't believe that any of them produced content for this event, and I wasn't able to get any of them to stream to me live. I was just busy. Sometimes that happens on Tuesdays, so I don't have any coverage and commentary of this event, but I did still want to showcase the deck lists because there's some interesting ones here. So let's move along to the second place deck list, which is going to be from NegativeToma, who is also a streamer and content creator for Marvel Snap, and they've put out videos on this deck before. I might link like that actual video below for when they played this in a tournament about a month ago. They sent me a video of that. This is missing a card, Phoenix Force. I don't own Phoenix Force yet. It was a season pass card that I haven't been super hot on. The other thing that's a little bit awkward about this deck, does play Hulkbuster. And one other thing that Glenn said to us as content creators is they were hoping that the nerf to Hulkbuster or the toning down of Hulkbuster would make it more appropriate in Phoenix Force lists and less appropriate in Deadpool lists. And where that is awkward is I knew I was sitting on the top 4 deck list from this event where a Hulkbuster list Destroy list defeated a Phoenix Force list that included Hulkbuster in the finals of the event. But this is still pretty cool. So I do not know what Phoenix Force lists typically look like. I have to be honest. I do not play them often enough. Like, I don't know if they are ever something that runs like Taskmaster, or if they typically like just go for Arnim Zola. I feel like, I don't know. I really, it's just not an archetype that I'm super familiar with, as you can see with the fact that I don't own a Phoenix Force. But I think that this is something that's been picking up steam a little bit recently. Safety Blade is a huge fan of Phoenix Force. They are often also like a top 400 player and a Marvel Snap Zone writer. And so there's definitely a lot of good players that like this list. I just can't really speak on it too much as I haven't played it. But it plays Nico. It plays a lot of the other Destroy cards that I am familiar with. It's got Arnim Zola to be able to high roll, and honestly can do some cool stuff. Yeah, it's got, I guess, like at least 4 cards. It's kind of a, you know what, this is Destroy deck number 7. We're gonna count this. I mean, it's got a number of cards that say Destroy. It's got Forge, just playing some other different payoffs with some other synergies, and then Heimdall as well at the top, which I'm not really sure what Heimdall does. I guess it's like a backup for when you don't have Phoenix Force. That probably is what it is. Yeah, I think this is a pretty sweet deck that a lot of other players have picked up on. I don't think I have many notes from the other players from this tournament, just because there's like language barrier issues that I only speak like a real little bit of Spanish. And I believe this next contributor might be, or this next person might be Spanish speaking. If not, yeah. This is a Spanish speaking player, and this is HerzK. I will leave a link for them down below as well. They played Discard, and this is like classic Apocalypse Dracula discard with Swarm and Lockjaw. We haven't seen this for a while. This was something that I was playing before Lockjaw was nerfed a long time ago, and the deck was really, really good when you could just, on the final turn of the game, throw 3 swarms into a Lockjaw, and also like maybe earlier before that you're like looping other cards through Lockjaw and like discarding Apocalypse a bunch of times. So this deck plays a bunch of different ways to discard, but it also plays Black Knight now as a new payoff, and I think that is kind of interesting, because what that means is you can then have multiple Apocalypses. You can play your Ebony Blade, and I think what you want to do is like discard Apocalypse a few times, then play Black Knight, and then discard it again, so that you're getting like a reasonably sized Ebony Blade there. And that's something cool that I haven't really seen this deck try out, but I am definitely going to try this list. It might not be this season. It might be what I climb with next season, as just a kind of off the beaten path sort of deck that is very free to play, player friendly, I think, as well. It's got some expensive cards in it now with MODOK and Black Knight, but definitely seems cool. And they're also playing Quake as their tech card of choice. This could probably be any other tech card as well, though there is definitely something to say for Quake being so cheap. I think that is a huge part of why Quake is here specifically. You can play it alongside Dracula, or alongside HerzK on the final turns of the game, or alongside like Blade and Gambit. So a lot of different ways to work it in with the curve, and some cool interactions that the card has. I haven't really played with Blade too much, but I was a big Legion fan. They did say specifically that Quake was a star card for them throughout the tournament. So I'm definitely interested in trying this list and trying out Quake, and let me know what you think of this. Discard might be back. I know one other thing, and you'll also notice no Mike in this list. Even a discard player choosing not to play Mike, which, yeah, I'm not really a huge fan of Mike, but I might be a fan of this list. That was the other thing I was going to say. We will have some more discard cards coming out next season. So I'm kind of curious to see what this deck will look like with just like 1 or 2 more cool new tools to play around with. But the fact that it's already putting up 3rd place results means that this is something, and I guess you would just cut Quake for whatever sweetness comes out. We'll see. We'll see what is available with next season. I haven't really looked at the cards. I've just heard people tell me that there are some discard cards coming. And then the final slot this week is going to be taken up with a Thanos list that isn't quite full lockdown, isn't quite fully teched out, and isn't playing Blob. It's not playing all of these huge cards. This is a very interesting Blob, or not Blob Thanos, just Thanos. It's not Lockjaw Thanos, it's not Blob Thanos, just Thanos. And still has some powerful cards with Professor X and Alioth to pursue like certain directions, but Mr. Fantastic instead of the typical Blue Marvel, or what else is Mr. Fantastic in there instead of, can't think of it, but like no Storm here either. And then no Iron Lad here, as the deck is playing a pretty low curve. It's got Nico, it's got Shadow King, and then Maximus as just another way to put out a bunch of power, with Enchantress being like the main tech card of choice, in addition to Mobius here, which I do think is a pretty strong card overall. But definitely an interesting Thanos list that I can't fully wrap my head around, to be honest. Oops. Meant to pop up this. Again, didn't really get too much input from Mr. High here because of language barrier issues. But let me know what you think of this Thanos list in particular, because it's still going to have, I don't know. I don't really know what to think of it. It's just like, this list is basically saying, I think stones are good. That's what this list is saying. I think stones are good. They give you flexible game plans, but I want to just play like a solid mid-range deck. So that's what it's doing. And it's very, very interesting in terms of a way to attack the metagame. Professor X plus Alioth, always going to be a powerful combination, even without the other stuff. And the stones are always going to be powerful, even without Blob and Magneto doing all of that, and Lockjaw doing all of that crazy stuff. Just the stones on their own, I think, are powerful, and the fact that Mr. High was able to get 4th place is able to showcase that as well. I'm getting a little bit tired. I'm falling off a little bit at the end of this video, as you might be able to tell. It's partially because I just recorded a really, really long video with Basic Destroy as kind of a send-off to the 3/5 Hulkbuster. I am probably going to play with 2/3 Hulkbuster as well in the future. And like I said, I've got a lot of other sweet content coming up. So if you want to see more Destroy, if you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed just me talking about decks and breaking it down, these videos have actually seemed to do kind of well in the past. So let me know if this is something that you are interested in the future. And then, I don't know, like, find me some decks to talk about and I will go through it, or I'll do my own research here, and that is the value added. But for today, I gotta get some sleep. OTA's coming, so I gotta edit this and get it out for y'all. But for today, that is gonna be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.